Thanks so much for coming, and thank you to Carol for stealing most of my speech. I'm Josh. As Bede said, I'm a Hebden Bridge resident and I'm also a local councillor. I was born and brought up here, so this community that Carol was talking about is very much my community. And I've been asked to talk about what made Slow the Flow successful and good to work with as a local authority. I'm going to talk about some of the key things to think about if you're approaching a local authority. I'm going to talk about why we chose to work with Slow the Flow specifically, and then I'll also talk a bit about what we offered as a council. And then I'm going to give a bit more general advice about how you might want to approach local politicians and decision makers in terms of getting your own things off the ground. And I know that there are councillors from other authorities here, so if I'm wrong, they can shout at me. I think part of understanding why natural flood management and Slow the Flow have been popular ideas begins with understanding what kind of community this is and what we faced in 2015. So you might have seen this photograph before. This is the High Street in Hebden Bridge in 2015 when it flooded. And it's pretty shocking, but actually the thing that I find most devastating is the images from the next day, which is when people's homes and businesses were destroyed and when our community was damaged. And that's what motivated the people who set up Slow the Flow to do what they did. It was when we were at our most vulnerable, we saw the special thing about a community. We saw a community coming together and seeing what they could do to help. And the first thing that they did was help clean up. This room was a hive of activity after the floods and the town hall in general, because people came up and did what was needed. We had cleaning teams, we had hot meals for people without power. We even had a dog that you could give a cuddle to if that's what you needed. And people arrived at this building with cleaning materials, with clothes. You can see some of the food there, and did what they could to help. The project managers managed the projects. Drivers drove people around. One volunteer I spent a day working with was my friend Michelle. She's a care worker, and what she's really good at is working out the difference between something looking clean and being sterile, which when you've had the kind of flooding that we had is important. And I mention that because with any voluntary organisation, looking around at the skills that you've got is absolutely vital to making sure that you can get the best possible outcome. And we did a hell of a job cleaning up. Within a year, we went from being flooded and devastated to winning the best small market town in the Great British High Street Awards. And that community spirit is one of the reasons that I think Slow the Flow worked. And in this area, we've got a tradition of trust in the community as a council. This building we're sitting in was given a new lease of life when it was asset transferred from the council and given to a community group to redevelop. And that's why it's got the business units, it's why it's got the cafe, it's why it's got this hall. And this is where I want to say to everyone from a local authority that's here today, that actually when you trust your communities and when you empower people locally is when the magic really happens. So local community spirit is one of the reasons I think Slow the Flow have been a successful organisation. But then we come to the first challenge, which is that there's always people who want to do things to help. And in terms of making natural flood management successful, your first barrier is how to make sure you're taken seriously. As a council, you always get people with a lot of different ideas when something like this happens. And they'll all come to you telling you that their idea uniquely will change everything and sort everything out. So we had some people calling for us to dredge the river, some people calling up for a ban on river dredging, some people wanting to plant more trees, some people most concerned about grouse farming and the impact that that had. We had some people who wanted massive civil engineering projects, and then some people talking about natural flood management. And there's positives and negatives to all these ideas. And the difficulty as an authority we have is where do we put our money, because we've only got a limited pot. And who are the best partners to work with? Who can we support and who will make a difference? And one of the things that Slow the Flow did very well was make sure that we took them seriously straight away. Local authorities like big civil engineering responses to things because, firstly, the modelling is always going to be much better for a big civil engineering thing than it is for lots of small level interventions. Secondly, it gives us something to point to make us feel better. We like big stuff. But you know, the small leaky dams would also have an impact. And one of the things that Slow the Flow did was they showed us both their pilot studies and also the kind of the evidence that they planned to gather with what they were doing. So we knew that they had a very clear proposal, a very clear idea, and that they would follow through with that and measure what they were doing, and we could see if it was a success or not. And luckily, the evidence that they're gathering is now being used for a change in the modelling that the Environment Agency and DEFRA are using. So hopefully, for other people trying to get NFM off the ground, it might be a little bit easier. So they gave us a serious proposal, and they had a professional approach, which for a council is important. And they demonstrated that they had people with different skills, and actually one of those skills was their communication. So to summarise, as a council we have to know that we're getting a return on our investment. We have to know that what you're going to do and that it will be done. And while we offer support to voluntary organisations, frankly, as a council we always like working with people who've got their act together. One advantage we have is that a number of the organisations and individuals involved in Slow the Flow had a history of working with the council. So, for example, Tree Responsibility have been a long-term partner, and that meant that when people came to us, one, they were confident and knew who to talk to, but also it meant that we knew that these are people who've got a history of delivering. So I'd say look around at your group and identify the skills you have, but also identify the skills that you need and see if you can find people who have them. And those skills aren't just who can build the best dam and design it, but it's also who can communicate that well, who can write a funding proposal. I'd also say look for other organisations around who are doing similar things, because those organisations firstly will know what doors to knock on, but secondly, they will be able to give you support as well. Once Slow the Flow have got our attention, they've been brilliant at driving work forward. With bodies like a council, being proactive and frankly giving us a nudge occasionally always helps. They've come up with new proposals and they've followed up on the old ones and shown that it's worked. We still have to deal with some old-fashioned regulation when it comes to disruption of watercourses. And Slow the Flow have been very good at telling the council when we need to unblock the bureaucracy. Unblock the bureaucracy, not unblock the watercourse, obviously. And you know, events like this help keep you at the top of our mind. And that success has bred success. I mean, my perception is that every time I talk to Adrian, Slow the Flow have got another partner working with them, be they landowners, the National Trust, the Environment Agency, Leeds University. The list goes on, and nothing makes the council feel more confident that we've backed the right horse than other people getting involved and seeing what you're doing. So at this stage, I've given a bit of a background about the floods, a bit of a look at what we look for in terms of partner organisation, and why Slow the Flow have been so easy to work with. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the support that we as a council offered. So the first one, money. Don't get too excited, and I'm going to get this out of the way quickly. If you've got a anti-flooding proposal which is based on or reliant on riches from the council, you probably need to look in a different way because, frankly, councils don't have riches at the moment. However, with voluntary-based organisations, a little bit of money can go a long way. We've been able to direct some of the funding money we've got from DEFRA and the Environment Agency, for example, to put together the natural flood management grants, which we've worked with Source Partnership on. And that's to help landowners implement natural flood management on their own land. This was so well received, it's actually now up to £500,000. The next thing, and you can see there's bullet points here, so there's more to say on it than money, is institutional support. And I think actually with natural flood management, that's where councils can be most useful. And it's somewhere I think that Calderdale have really led. Once we had been convinced that NFM should be a large part of our anti-flooding infrastructure, that we committed to it fully. Now, I sit on one of a number of committees who've got responsibility over flooding and looking at how well it's working. But the main committee is the, I've got it written down here, sorry, is the Flood Resilience Board, and that has 5 subcommittees, one of which is Slow the Flow. And, you know, that so is natural flood management, and Slow the Flow are a key organisation in that. In 2017, we also became the first local authority to employ a full-time natural flood management officer. And again, you know, one of the things that we can really do is unblock those bureaucratic problems and help empower people to do things. Another thing that we can do is open doors in terms of both relationship and funding. If you think that, you know, the local water authority, the Environment Agency, the Canal and Rivers Trust, you know, the National Trust or any other organisation like that can be helpful to your organisation, councils are often uniquely placed at the centre of a lot of those organisations to open doors for people and support them. Another thing that councils offer is, if you are a voluntary organisation, support for voluntary organisations. Every council will have someone who is responsible for voluntary organisations and used to working with them, and they can help you with both things like a constitution and advice on how to set up a bank account. Finally, publicity. Now, all local authorities have press offices. If your council is supporting what you're doing, then when you're doing something big, let them know and they will help get that out there. And the more key people you get along, the more likely they are to kind of push on that. So, and you know, in Calderdale we've got a specific flooding press officer, so you know, and they've got contacts in kind of local media and specific trade media, which can help get the message out further. So we can offer the financial support, the institutional support. We can support you as a voluntary organisation. We can open doors and make sure others take you seriously, and we can support you in terms of publicity. Finally, I'm just going to give a few bits of advice on how to approach local councils, councillors, politicians, and so forth. And I'm going to start off with talking about why I was first convinced to take Slow the Flow seriously. I went to a presentation that they were holding for the community, and there were 2 things that kind of caught my attention. The first was that they had a very clear vision and an idea how they were going to evidence that vision. And the second was that they were very professional in how they communicated that. And it made sense to me. And when it made sense to me, I was very happy to support something that made sense and would make a difference. And from that point, I was enthusiastic about supporting the work that Slow the Flow have done. And I've had similar conversations with other councillors who say that, you know, the moment that the penny dropped was when they were giving a tour of the leaky dams in Hargsall Crags, or when they saw, you know, a presentation of, you know, the work that they were doing with the cameras to monitor it. And it's that, you know, that professionalism, both of communication but also of approach, that makes a real difference. So what are my rules for talking to politicians? The first thing is that we're human beings. Politicians aren't just a bunch of kind of venally self-interested, you know, kind of dodgy characters, albeit Westminster's not doing the best example of proving that case to me at the moment. But certainly at a local level, people are in politics because they care about their community. And I say this about my colleagues in all parties. You know, people become a local councillor because they want to make a difference. And they get involved in that because they want to get they want things to be better for their community. The second thing I would say, though, is that we're human beings, but we're also only human. And I read things that are sent to councillors that assume that I've got several PhDs in several different subjects. And we really don't. And I'm not saying that when you talk to us, assume that we're thick. But please don't assume that we know anything either. And so, you know, start from first principles, because most politicians will know a little bit about they'll know a lot about their area. They'll have some special areas where they're particularly interested in, and anything else they'll be kind of willing to be led by you. The third thing, and I've not put this up there, but it's quite an important thing to remember whenever you're approaching people, is please don't tell us that your idea will win us an election, and definitely don't tell us that your idea will definitely lose us an election if we don't get involved. We know what will win us and lose us elections because we know our areas really well, but actually also we're not the venal crux. We do actually want to help our community. Start from what's best for our community and people will follow. Fourthly, and this sort of contradicts what I've just said, but we do quite like publicity. If you want to get people involved, you know, it's the only way that we can tell people that we're active in our community, people who aren't already active. There's a website somewhere, it's called Politicians Pointing at Things, and it's pictures of exactly that, and that's because newspapers are the way that we show that we're doing. And I hope there's not too many pictures of me pointing at things on that, but it's, you know, it is what we end up doing. You know, we do want to do stuff, but also we'll always take the publicity if it's coming. So I hope that was useful. I'm going to finish with a thought. Which is that I'm not sure that anything could have stopped the flooding here in 2015. It was a 1 in 250-year weather event. But frankly, with climate change, we've got to be more prepared for the 1 in 100-year weather events to keep coming. As a Hebden Bridge native, there's still a certain amount of trauma from the 2015 floods. And when the flood sirens went off, I was actually running on the moors. And I ran back into town because that's what you do with your local councillor. And I got changed. I started going around seeing what help I could offer to the flood wardens and just going around talking to shopkeepers, helping them get stuff off the floor and that sort of stuff, and offering reassurance where it was needed. We got very close, but the peak flow fell maybe a foot short of, say, what would have caused serious flooding. And that would have been damaging to people's homes and their businesses, but it also would have been damaging to people's psychological well-being, and it's worth remembering that. And that peak flow wasn't as high because of the work that these guys have done. The time that they spent in the woods saved businesses in their community from being damaged. And a Boxing Day flood is difficult to stop, but flood defence is about using every tool in your arsenal. And with natural flood management, you not only use every tool in your arsenal, but you give a lot of people control and power over their own lives and over defending their own community. And you help save your town, you help stop that flooding. And that made a difference. It gave us power. So I hope that by coming today, people are taking the first step in making a difference for their own community and giving people power. So thank you for your time, and let's go ahead and make some change. Thank you.